There is a precise calculus to assassination, one that relies almost entirely on predictability. Human beings, despite their profound illusions of complexity, are remarkably reliable when they are about to die. They freeze, they plead, or they run. My job, as a Blue Faction analytical agent, was simply to anticipate which of the three they would choose and place a lethally dosed needle in the corresponding trajectory. Cornelius Vance was a runner. I knew this because I had spent the last 40 minutes of the winter ball tracking his micro-expressions. Beneath the ridiculous opulence of his Newport mansion, a monument to Gilded Age excess, dripping with crystal chandeliers and the suffocating scent of imported orchids, the railroad tycoon was sweating. His pupils were dilated. His grip on his Scotch glass was tight enough to whiten his knuckles. He was looking for an exit. When he finally slipped out the heavy mahogany doors toward the second-floor balcony, seeking the freezing Atlantic air to calm his nerves, I followed. The plan was clean. A simple prick from the poison needle concealed in my left cufflink, a simulated heart attack, and an early train back to the 25th century. What I had not factored into my elegant arithmetic was the sudden, suffocating scent of ozone and sandalwood. "You're standing in my drop zone, analyst." The voice came from the shadows near the stone balustrade, low and entirely devoid of professional courtesy. "Jackson Mercer. If I were a man prone to dramatic size, I would have let one out." Mercer was Red Faction's premier field agent. He was a blunt instrument, wrapped in a deceptively well-tailored tuxedo, a man who solved complex political paradoxes by simply stabbing them until they stopped moving. I dealt in psychology and microscopic toxins. He dealt in shattered femurs and ceramic blades. Vance was leaning over the railing, blissfully unaware that two rival temporal operatives were currently debating his imminent demise 10 feet behind him. "This is a blue operation, Mercer," I whispered, stepping smoothly into the moonlight. I kept my posture relaxed, hands visible, calculating the distance between us, 6 feet. "Your agency's blunt force approach will trigger a historical anomaly. Stand down." "My agency pays me to be thorough, Hayes," Mercer replied. He didn't shift his stance, but the subtle drop in his right shoulder told me everything. He was preparing to draw. "And you look like a man who hasn't won a physical altercation since boarding school." There was no time for a witty rebuttal. Vance turned, startled by the low murmur of our voices. The window of opportunity was closing. Mercer moved. It wasn't a charge, it was an erasure of distance, terrifyingly fast and utterly silent. He wasn't aiming for Vance yet. He was aiming for me. To a field agent, an analyst is just an obstacle, something to be temporarily incapacitated before the actual work begins. I saw the strike coming, a brutal, sweeping elbow aimed directly at my jaw, designed to rattle the brain inside the skull and induce immediate unconsciousness. My body reacted before my conscious mind could issue a command. 5 years of defensive training kicked in, to absorb the kinetic energy of a close-quarters strike. You do not block, you yield. You shift your center of gravity. I pivoted. My left foot stepped backward, heel striking the freezing marble of the balcony floor. That was the exact millisecond Mercer's forearm grazed the fabric of my coat, right over the spot where my temporal locator was embedded beneath my skin. His own locator, housed in a similar subdermal implant on his wrist, crashed into my magnetic field. The fracture didn't sound like breaking glass. It sounded like a massive, resonant bell being struck underwater. The physical sensation was grotesque. The freezing Atlantic wind vanished, replaced by the suffocating heat of a compressed vacuum. The silver moonlight smeared into violently bright streaks of gold and crimson. For one horrifying second, I felt my lungs empty themselves of air, my blood reversing its course through my veins, and the architecture of the mansion folding in on itself, like an origami puzzle being undone by an angry child. And then, just as violently, gravity returned. I stumbled, my polished leather shoes hitting solid wood, hardwood not marble. The crushing smell of orchids hit me first, then the overwhelming, deafening swell of a 60-piece orchestra playing the opening notes of a Strauss waltz. I blinked, fighting the intense wave of nausea that always accompanied uncalibrated temporal shifts. The cold balcony was gone. The ocean was gone. I was standing in the exact center of the main ballroom on the first floor. Hundreds of guests in silk and velvet swirled around me laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that reality had just violently hiccuped. I quickly glanced at the grandfather clock against the far wall. 8 p.m. 3 hours. We had jumped exactly 3 hours backward. My mind began to race, compartmentalizing the panic and feeding it into pure logic. Temporal displacement without a headquarters-initiated sequence was impossible unless two localized magnetic fields violently collided while a kinetic anchor was established. I looked down at my feet. My left foot. I had stepped backward with my left foot to anchor myself against Mercer's strike. That was the physical trigger. The collision of our implants had rewritten the immediate spatial rules of this coordinate. Any backward motion on the left axis resets the temporal loop. "Tell me you didn't just do what I think you did." The voice was a low, dangerous hiss directly to my right. I turned. Jackson Mercer was standing not 3 feet away from me. He looked exactly as immaculate as he had on the balcony, save for the fact that his jaw was clenched so tightly, I thought his teeth might shatter. The ceramic blade was half drawn from his sleeve, but he was frozen, acutely aware that there were 300 witnesses surrounding us. I didn't do anything, Mercer, I said, my voice maintaining the calm, flat cadence of a man reporting the weather. You brought an unshielded temporal locator into a localized combat zone. Now we are caught in a magnetic spatial loop. A loop, he repeated, his dark eyes narrowing, assessing the room and then snapping back to me. Yes, and unless you want to spend eternity reliving the hors d'oeuvres being served, I suggest you don't step backward with your left foot. We stood there, perfectly still amidst the swirling dancers. 2 predators trapped in a gilded, waltzing cage. Neither of us could draw a weapon. Neither of us could kill the target. And worse, neither of us could move without the explicit risk of tearing the fabric of time. Mercer stared at me, the hostility radiating off him in palpable waves. I stared back, silently calculating the statistical probability of me surviving the night. It was regrettably very low. Standing perfectly still in the middle of a Gilded Age ballroom is a mathematical impossibility. A society event of this caliber is not a gathering. It is a chaotic fluid dynamic. 300 bodies, encased in stiff wool, heavily boned corsets, and yards of rustling silk, move according to unpredictable currents of gossip champagne and orchestral cues. To stand frozen is to become a rock in a very fast, very oblivious river. Put the blade away, Mercer, I murmured, my lips barely moving. I kept my eyes fixed on the sweeping collar of a woman's emerald dress, passing entirely too close to my left shoulder. Mercer's jaw ticked. The ceramic blade disappeared back up his sleeve with a practiced flick of his wrist. If someone bumps into you. I know, I cut him off, my voice a tight whisper. If I am pushed backward, the kinetic shock resets the loop. We return to 8 p.m. again. Then don't get pushed. I am an analyst, Mercer, not a load-bearing pillar. If that gentleman to your right, who has clearly consumed 4 glasses of port, steps on my foot, physics will dictate a backward reflex. As if summoned by my observation, the port-soaked gentleman let out a booming laugh, throwing his weight backward. His elbow swung dangerously toward my chest. I couldn't retreat. I braced for the impact, calculating the exact angle I would need to twist my torso to absorb it without shifting my feet. I didn't have to. Mercer moved. He didn't strike the man. He simply shifted his weight, turning his shoulder into an immovable barrier that the drunk gentleman bounced off of with a muted thud. The man muttered a sloppy apology to Mercer's back and stumbled away. Mercer didn't even look at him. His dark eyes remained fixed on me, calculating sharp and increasingly irritated. We cannot stand here like statues' haze. It draws the eye, and frankly, your survival instincts are a liability. My survival instincts are currently preventing us from being unwritten from existence. I retorted cleanly. I rapidly scanned the room. The perimeter was lined with velvet chairs, but moving toward them meant navigating a gauntlet of erratic dancers. Standing still was a ticking time bomb. We needed to control our spatial momentum. We needed an axis that we mutually dictated. I looked at the swirling couples around us. They moved in precise, predetermined patterns, the waltz. In 3/4 time, step, slide, close. A controlled, centrifugal force where 2 bodies balance each other's weight. I swallowed the sudden, dry taste of dread in my throat. We have to move. Where? Mercer demanded. Nowhere. We have to move right here. We have to anchor each other's center of gravity. If we hold each other, we control the exact trajectory of every step. No one can bump us. No one can force a misstep. Mercer stared at me. For a moment, the fearsome red faction field agent looked as though I had just suggested we eat one of the crystal chandeliers. You want to dance? I want to establish a mutual kinetic lock. I corrected, though the semantics hardly mattered. It is the only logical solution to our spatial vulnerability. Hayes, 2 men waltzing in the center of the Vanderbilt's winter ball, is not going to blend in. It will if we make it look like a deliberate, eccentric wager between gentlemen, I said, my mind racing through the social variables. But more importantly, we have to be flawless. Look toward the grand staircase. 2 o'clock. Mercer didn't turn his head, he was too well trained for that, but his eyes shifted. Standing on the first landing, looking down upon the ballroom like an apex predator, surveying a particularly disappointing herd of gazelles, was Lady Harrington. She was a terrifying structure of purple velvet and diamonds, wielding a gold-rimmed lorgnette. In the ruthless ecosystem of New York high society, she was the absolute authority on etiquette. She has already signaled security twice tonight to remove guests who exhibited unrefined posture. I whispered, if we stand here glaring at each other, or if we shuffle around like terrified recruits, she will have Vance's guards escort us out. We will lose access to the target. We have to dance, Mercer, and we have to do it well enough to satisfy a woman who finds fault in the way people breathe. Mercer looked back at me. There was a long, terrible silence between us, underscored by the sweeping violins. He was weighing the absolute absurdity of the situation against the lethal pragmatism of his training. Pragmatism won. It always did with the Red faction. "If you step on my foot," Mercer said, his voice dropping an octave into something that felt entirely too physical, "I will stab you in the liver, loop or no loop." "Noted," I replied. He closed the distance between us. To an assassin, physical proximity is a threat. To an analyst, it is a localized data set. As Mercer stepped into my space, my brain flooded with involuntary observations. He smelled of cold air, sharp ozone, and the faint, woody scent of sandalwood. He was exactly 2 inches taller than me. His shoulders were rigidly tense, yet his movements possessed a terrifying, fluid grace. He didn't ask for permission. His right hand came up and settled on my waist. The touch was a shock to the system. The heat of his palm bled through the fine wool of my tuxedo jacket. It was an iron grip, not the gentle hold of a dance partner, but the absolute, controlling clamp of a man ensuring his hostage wouldn't bolt. I forced my breathing to remain steady, raising my left hand to rest on his shoulder. Underneath the tailored silk, his musculature was coiled tighter than a steel spring. I intertwined my right fingers with his left, completing the frame. "Don't lead," Mercer commanded softly, his face inches from mine. I am controlling the left axis rotation. "Just keep us away from the pillars," I murmured back. The orchestra swelled, hitting the heavy downbeat of the measure. Mercer stepped forward. I stepped back with my right foot. The traitor's waltz had begun. The waltz is, by its very architectural design, an exercise in vulnerability. You surrender your center of gravity to another person, trusting that their momentum will complement yours rather than collapse it. For a civilian, it is romance. For a temporal analyst trained to view every human interaction as a potential threat vector, it is a waking nightmare. Mercer was a terrifyingly adept dancer. I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised. Field agents of the Red faction were trained in physical mimicry, the art of blending into any room, from a dockside tavern to a Vanderbilt gala. But there was nothing passive about the way he led. He moved with the predatory, calculated grace of a shark navigating a reef. "Step, slide, close," I muttered under my breath, tracking my own feet with mathematical desperation. Right foot back, left foot side, right foot close. Mercer was absorbing my restricted mobility seamlessly, adjusting the angle of our turns, so my left foot only ever moved forward or laterally. "Stop counting," Mercer whispered, his breath warm against my temple. "You look like a man defusing a bomb, not enjoying a ball." "I am defusing a bomb," I replied, staring fixedly at the crisp white collar of his shirt. "You are the bomb, and the trigger is located directly beneath my left heel." A couple in a flurry of pink taffeta swerved erratically into our path. Mercer reacted instantly, his hand, planted firmly on the small of my back, clamped down like a vice. He yanked me flush against his chest, executing a sharp, improvisational pivot to shield us from the collision. The physical impact knocked the breath out of me, but my brain bypassed the lack of oxygen and went straight to threat assessment. He's closing the distance to neutralize my arms. The pressure on my lower spine. He's locating the exact gap between my floating ribs. A ceramic blade inserted there would puncture the kidney and cause massive internal hemorrhaging within 3 minutes. In response, my left hand, resting on his shoulder, instinctively slid a fraction of an inch higher, my thumb pressing lightly against the side of his neck. Mercer's entire body went rigid. The muscles under his silk jacket turned to granite. He looked down at me, his dark eyes flashing with sudden, cold violence. He thinks I'm going for his carotid artery, I realized. He thinks I'm calculating the pressure required to collapse his windpipe. We were 2 paranoid apex predators, trapped in an embrace that looked like intimacy to the rest of the room, but was actually a high-stakes standoff. Every shift of weight was an interrogation. Every tightening of a grip was a death threat. The orchestra hit a minor chord, and the scent of the ballroom, heavy imported orchids, and the underlying metallic tang of nervous sweat suddenly surged into my senses. My chest tightened. The grand ballroom of Newport flickered, overlaid with a ghost of a memory. Vienna, 1890. Another ballroom, another mission. I hadn't always been this rigidly opposed to physical proximity. 5 years ago, I had a partner, a Blue Faction operative named Silas. We had been dancing exactly like this, maintaining a cover during a diplomatic extraction. I had trusted him to watch my blind spot. I had let him hold my waist, let him dictate our movement. I didn't see the blade until he had already slipped it between my ribs. "Nothing personal, Nate," Silas had whispered into my ear, holding me up as the poison paralyzed my lungs, smiling for the crowd as I bled out onto the polished floor. If the extraction team hadn't breached the room 30 seconds later, I would have died there. I survived, but the lesson was permanently etched into my nervous system. Never surrender your blind spot. Never let anyone close enough to dictate your balance. And now, Jackson Mercer, a man literally paid by an opposing faction to end my existence, had his hand wrapped entirely around my waist. My breathing hitched. The rhythm of the 3/4 time signature began to fracture in my head. My legs felt heavy, the knee joints locking up. The panic wasn't rational, I knew logically, that Mercer couldn't kill me without resetting the loop. But trauma does not care about spatial physics. Hayes, Mercer's voice was sharp. I couldn't answer. I was missing the beat. My right foot dragged. Hayes, you're stiffening, move. I can't. I choked out, a cold sweat breaking across my forehead. Mercer glanced over my shoulder. Lady Harrington is looking directly at us. She's raising her lorgnette. If you don't relax your frame right now, the guards are going to be on us in 30 seconds. He tried to guide me into a sweeping turn, but I resisted, my body rigid with the phantom memory of a blade sliding into my back. If he pulled me any closer, I was going to throw a punch. Loop be damned. Suddenly, the vice-like grip on my waist changed. Mercer didn't let go, but the aggressive, controlling edge of his hold vanished. His hand flattened, spreading warmth across my lower back, grounding me. He leaned in, dipping his head so close that to any observer, including Lady Harrington, it looked as though he were whispering a scandalous endearment into my ear. Listen to me, analyst, he murmured, his voice dropping the hostility, leaving only a low, absolute certainty. I am not Sila's. My eyes snapped up to his face. How did he know about Vienna? I read your dossier, he said, answering my unspoken question. His eyes locked onto mine. I know why you flinch, but you need to engage your prefrontal cortex right now and look at the variables. I am a red agent. If I wanted to stab you, I would have done it from the front so I could watch your expression. I don't do cowardly back alley shivvies. It was a profoundly violent attempt at comfort, but it was exactly the kind of twisted logic my brain needed to latch onto. Breathe, Nathaniel, he ordered softly. Follow the cellos. Step on the downbeat. I am controlling the space. You are not going to die tonight. I took a sharp, shuddering breath. The scent of orchids faded. The ballroom snapped back into focus. I looked into Mercer's dark, calculating eyes, finding no deception there, only a fierce, pragmatic determination to survive. Right foot back, I whispered. Exactly, Mercer said, his mouth twitching into something that was almost, but not quite a smile. He stepped forward. I stepped back. We hit the turn perfectly, sweeping past Lady Harrington's critical gaze, just as the orchestra swelled into the chorus. The paranoia didn't entirely vanish, but it shifted, solidifying into something new, a terrifying, functional symbiosis. There is a distinct, measurable shift in the human body when it transitions from a state of observation to a state of execution. The heart rate stabilizes. The peripheral vision narrows. The micro-tremors in the hands cease entirely. I felt this shift in Jackson Mercer precisely 3 minutes and 40 seconds into the waltz. We were sweeping along the eastern edge of the ballroom, navigating a cluster of laughing debutantes. Mercer's frame, which had been rigidly maintaining our spatial boundaries, suddenly acquired a different kind of tension. It was the coiled, electric stillness of a predator that had finally locked onto its prey. 2 o'clock, Mercer murmured, his lips brushing the air near my ear, perfectly playing the part of a besotted gentleman. By the gilded archway. I didn't turn my head immediately. I let the natural rotation of the dance carry my line of sight toward the archway. Cornelius Vance stood there, flanked by 2 immense potted ferns. He looked exactly as the briefings had described. A formidable silhouette of Gilded Age wealth, his broad chest straining against a tailored waistcoat, a thick Cuban cigar clamped in his hand. He was surveying the ballroom with the arrogant boredom of a man who owned the railroads that brought half these people to Newport. I see him, I whispered back. 3 more rotations, Mercer said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. I will spin you outward on the downbeat. I will draw the ceramic blade, sever his descending aorta, and catch him before he hits the floor. It will look like a sudden cardiac event. In the ensuing panic, you will secure our extraction coordinates, and we will jump back to the 25th century. It was a brilliantly brutal plan. It was also, I noted with dry detachment, a plan that conveniently left me exposed as the closest suspect, while Mercer faded into the chaos. Red faction agents were nothing if not ruthlessly efficient. And if I refuse to be your distraction, I asked, maintaining the frame of our dance, then I will paralyze your diaphragm with a nerve strike on my way to Vance, and you can spend your last few seconds of consciousness explaining temporal physics to Lady Harrington. Mercer's hand applied a fraction of pressure to my lower back, a physical promise. Don't complicate this, analyst. We are out of time. We completed the first rotation. We were 30 feet away. I focused my attention entirely on Vance. Not his clothing, not his posture. As a blue faction agent, my expertise lay not in the gross mechanics of violence, but in the microscopic betrayals of the human face. The nervous system cannot lie. I watched Vance raise the cigar to his mouth. Wait. We completed the second rotation. 20 feet away. A woman in a breathtakingly low-cut scarlet gown walked past Vance, offering him a sultry, inviting smile. Vance glanced at her, nodded politely, and looked back at his drink. "Wronged. Mercer," I said sharply, "abort." Mercer's grip on my waist turned to iron. "We are committed, Hayes." "Right foot back." I said abort the strike sequence, I hissed, my fingers digging brutally into the musculature of his shoulder. We were 10 feet away. Mercer was preparing to drop his right hand to his sleeve. "It's not him." For a fraction of a second, Mercer's rhythm faltered. It wasn't enough for the other guests to notice, but I felt the violent clash between his momentum and his training. You do not interrupt a red agent mid-strike. It was a good way to get your own throat slit. But Mercer, to his credit, was a professional. He absorbed the aborted kinetic energy, seamlessly converting the assassination spin into a deep, sweeping promenade turn that carried us past the archway and back into the center of the ballroom. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't throw you backward onto your left foot right now and reset this entire miserable night," Mercer growled, his face maintaining a flawless, charming smile for the passing crowd while his eyes promised murder. "Because if you kill that man, you fail your mission," I replied, my breathing slightly elevated from the exertion of fighting his momentum. "He's a decoy. A body doubled. He matches the biometric profile perfectly. Height, weight, facial structure. Red Faction relies entirely too much on gross anatomy," I said, unable to keep the academic disdain out of my voice. "Look at how he's holding the cigar, Mercer. He's gripping it with the pads of his fingers, keeping the cherry far away from his jacket. The real Cornelius Vance is a chainsmoker with a known disregard for his own wardrobe. He holds a cigar clamped between his knuckles, and his right index finger has a permanent nicotine stain. That man's hands are manicured." Mercer's eyes flicked over my shoulder, executing a rapid visual sweep. "Furthermore," I continued, "Cornelius Vance is a documented, predatory narcissist. A stunning woman in a scarlet dress just gave him an open invitation. The real Vance's pupils would have dilated. His chin would have tilted up in a subconscious display of dominance. That man just nodded like a bored bank clerk. He's an actor, an expensive one, but an actor." There was a long, terrifying silence between us as we waltzed. I could practically hear the gears turning in Mercer's head as he cross-referenced my behavioral analysis against his tactical parameters. Slowly, the murderous tension in his shoulders evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating pragmatism. "Vance knows," Mercer concluded quietly. "He knows someone is making a move tonight." "Exactly. Which means the real Vance is hiding somewhere in this mansion, waiting for the assassin to reveal themselves by attacking the decoy. If we stop moving to search for him, Lady Harrington's guards will throw us out. And if we step backward with the left foot, the magnetic fields collide and we reset the loop. Losing the element of surprise," I added. Mercer looked down at me. The hostility was gone. In its place was a sharp, dangerous gleam of pure tactical synchronicity. We were no longer two hostages holding each other at gunpoint. We were a single, functional weapon. "We need to scan the entire perimeter of the ballroom, the upper galleries, and the connecting drawing rooms," Mercer said. "We use the dance as a mobile surveillance platform." "I'll be the eyes," I said. "You navigate." As if the universe recognized the escalating stakes, the conductor at the front of the room tapped his baton. The graceful, sweeping tempo of the standard waltz vanished, replaced instantly by the aggressive, breathless, dizzying speed of a Viennese waltz. "Hold on, analyst," Mercer whispered, his hand flattening against my spine as he accelerated our momentum. "Let's go hunting." The Viennese waltz is not a dance, it is a centrifuge. At 60 measures a minute, it is designed to push the blood to the extremities, flush the cheeks, and induce a state of breathless, romantic vertigo. I was experiencing the vertigo, though I can assure you there was nothing romantic about it. Mercer navigated the swirling chaos of the ballroom with terrifying precision. He was the anchor, entirely unaffected by the centrifugal force, spinning us in wide, sweeping arcs that covered maximum square footage. My job was infinitely more complicated. I had to maintain my frame, keep my left foot moving strictly forward or laterally, and process the biometric data of 300 moving faces at high speed. False, too tall. No nicotine stain. Symmetrical gait. Vance has a slight limp from a hunting accident in '88. False. The ballroom became a blur of silk and diamonds, interspersed with sharp, momentary flashes of faces. The sheer computational effort required to analyze microexpressions, while being whipped around a room at a dizzying tempo, was giving me a severe ocular headache. "Gallery," Mercer muttered, his breath hitching slightly from the physical exertion of hauling my dead weight through the turns. "Check the upper gallery." I tipped my head back, letting the momentum carry my gaze upward. The gilded balcony overlooking the main floor was lined with older aristocrats, sipping champagne and looking down at the spectacle. I scanned their hands, their postures. Nothing, I gritted out. "Keep moving." I am running out of floor haze. We are approaching the eastern bottleneck near the kitchens. The crowd was denser here, the dancers compressed as servants wove in and out through a set of swinging doors, carrying silver trays of fresh hors d'oeuvres. Then, the chaotic variable struck. It wasn't a calculated move by a rival agent. It was the port-soaked gentleman from earlier. He had evidently transitioned from port to absinthe, and his internal gyroscope had completely failed. He stumbled wildly backward, right into the path of our rotation. "Look out," I started. Mercer saw him a fraction of a second before I did. If we maintained our trajectory, the man would crash into my left side, inevitably knocking me backward. Mercer didn't hesitate. He broke the elegant frame of the waltz, his right arm locking around my waist like a steel cable, and yanked me violently to the right, fundamentally altering our center of gravity. I didn't step backward, but the sudden, brutal acceleration threw my upper body wildly out of alignment. My right arm flailed outward to catch my balance. My knuckles slammed hard into the underside of a passing waiter's silver tray. The waiter yelped. A towering arrangement of crystal champagne flutes toppled. Most of them crashed onto the tray itself, but one, a slender, expensive piece of cut crystal, plummeted over the edge. It hit the marble floor precisely where my left foot would have been if Mercer hadn't pulled me away. The sound of shattering glass pierced through the sweeping violins. Nobody stopped. In New York high society, acknowledging a spilled drink is a far greater faux pas than the spill itself. The dancers simply widened their circles to avoid the hazard. A harried butler gestured frantically for a sweeping boy, but the jagged, glittering shards remained scattered across the white marble. I barely had time to register the broken glass before a sudden, blinding agony shot up my left arm. I gasped, my knees buckling. If Mercer hadn't been holding me up, I would have collapsed. Hayes, Mercer's voice was sharp. My wrist I hissed, grabbing his shoulder to stay upright. Mercer glanced down at his own left wrist. Beneath the fabric of his sleeve, a sickly, pulsing red light was bleeding through his skin. My own subdermal implant was glowing with the same terrifying hue. The pain wasn't physical trauma, it was neurological feedback. The sudden kinetic jerk, I breathed, my mind racing through the technical manuals of the temporal matrix. When you pulled me, the opposing magnetic fields of our locators experienced a friction spike. We overloaded the dampeners. In English Analyst, Mercer demanded, forcing us to keep swaying to the music, so we wouldn't draw Lady Harrington's attention. "The temporal core is destabilizing," I said, looking up at him, my vision swimming slightly from the pain. "The loop is fracturing. If we step backward with the left foot now, it won't just reset us to 8 p.m. The core will detonate. It will erase our biosignatures from the timeline entirely. We won't just die, Mercer. We will never have existed." The blood drained from Mercer's face. For the first time since I met him on the balcony, the impenetrable red field agent looked genuinely horrified. He looked down at the floor, specifically at my left foot, as if it were a live grenade with the pin pulled. "No more resets," Mercer said, his voice entirely devoid of its usual arrogant drawl. "This is the final run." "Then we need to find him now," I said, fighting through the throbbing in my arm. I turned my head, desperately scanning the remaining crowd. The waltz was reaching its crescendo. The sheer panic in my system paradoxically hyperfocused my vision. I stopped looking at the center of the room. I started looking at the shadows, the exits, the places where a man who knew he was being hunted would hide. My eyes swept past the swinging doors of the kitchen, tracking the movement of a servant. And there, standing in the dimly lit servants' corridor, partially obscured by a heavy velvet curtain, was a silhouette. He was wearing a slightly rumpled tuxedo jacket. He was standing perfectly still, watching the decoy by the archway. And clasped in his right hand, gripped tightly between the knuckles rather than the fingertips, was an unlit cigar. Even from 20 feet away, I could see the heavy, yellowed nicotine stain on his index finger. I squeezed Mercer's shoulder. "Got him," I whispered. "Servants' corridor. 10 o'clock. Mercer didn't look. He didn't need to. I felt the electric, lethal tension flood back into his frame, erasing the fear of the failing temporal core. "Hold your breath, Hayes," Mercer murmured softly. "We're going off the dance floor." Breaking the perimeter of a formal waltz is generally considered a social faux pas. Doing it by violently spinning your partner through a set of heavy swinging doors into a dimly lit servants' corridor is practically a declaration of war against high society. We hit the wooden doors back first, Mercer absorbing the impact with his broad shoulders to protect my left foot. The heavy oak swung open, swallowing us into the narrow, shadow-drenched hallway, cutting off the sweeping violins of the ballroom. Cornelius Vance was standing exactly where I had spotted him, but he was not alone. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, the shadows detached themselves from the walls. 4 men. They were dressed in the livery of Newport footmen, but their posture weight, distributed evenly on the balls of their feet, hands hovering near the lapels of their coats, screamed Pinkerton thugs. "We have company," I breathed. "Take the target," Mercer replied, his voice a low, lethal hum. "I will clear the path." The transition from a Viennese waltz to close-quarters combat is surprisingly seamless if you simply stop pretending that spins are meant to be polite. Mercer released my right hand, but kept his iron grip on my waist, using our combined centrifugal force to launch me forward. As I flew toward Vance, Mercer pivoted gracefully on his heel, his left arm shooting out in a devastating clothesline that caught the first Pinkerton square in the trachea. I didn't watch the man fall. I was already engaged. With a flick of my left wrist, the mechanism inside my cufflink engaged. A microscopic needle, coated in a synthetic, fast-acting neurotoxin, designed to mimic a massive myocardial infarction, slid into the palm of my hand. Vance's eyes widened in recognition. He wasn't just a rich man hiding. He knew exactly what we were. He scrambled backward, shouting an order. The second guard lunged at me, drawing a heavy brass blackjack. I sidestepped, dropping my right shoulder to slip under his swing, and thrust my left hand forward, aiming for the exposed flesh of Vance's neck. I was 6 inches away when the third guard tackled me from the side. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs. My arm was jolted violently off course, the poison needle slicing harmlessly through the fabric of Vance's coat instead of his skin. The guard and I crashed into a heavy wooden serving cart, sending silver platters clattering to the floor. Hayes, Mercer barked. I scrambled up, my heart hammering against my ribs. The third guard was drawing a revolver. The fourth was moving to flank me. Vance was already turning toward the back exit, the heavy iron door that led to the snowy grounds outside. If he made it through that door, the mission was a catastrophic failure. I need an angle, I shouted, dodging a wild punch from the fourth guard. The ground is too crowded. Mercer, who had just finished rendering the first 2 guards unconscious, with a sickening sequence of ceramic blade strikes and blunt force trauma, assessed the geometry of the hallway in a fraction of a second. He didn't run toward me, he slid, closing the distance with the terrifying speed of a striking viper. He grabbed the lapels of the fourth guard, used the man's own forward momentum to hurl him into the brick wall, and then turned to me. "Jump," Mercer roared. I didn't think. I didn't calculate the physics. I just planted my right foot and launched myself into the air. Mercer's hands caught me perfectly by the waist. In the ballroom, it would have been the most spectacular, scandalous lift of the century. In the servants' corridor, it was a human trebuchet. Mercer channeled his entire core strength, pivoting and throwing me upward and forward, directly over the third guard's raised revolver. Time seemed to slow as I sailed through the dim air. Below me, the guard fired, the gunshot deafening in the narrow space, but the bullet shattered a gas lamp above Mercer's head, missing us both. Ahead of me, Cornelius Vance had his hand on the iron doorknob. I extended my left arm. Gravity and Mercer's throw did the rest. I collided with Vance's broad back, my left hand slapping hard against the exposed, sweating skin of his neck just below the collar. The needle sank in. The neurotoxin deployed instantly. Vance stiffened, a terrible, wheezing gasp escaped his lips. His hand fell from the doorknob, clutching his chest, and his eyes rolled back as the synthetic heart attack took hold. He collapsed onto the stone floor, heavy and lifeless. But gravity wasn't finished with me. The momentum of the airborne strike sent me tumbling backward off Vance's collapsing body. I hit the floor hard, sliding wildly across the polished stone. We were sliding back toward the swinging doors that led to the ballroom. I scrambled to find purchase, my boots scrambling on the slick surface. And then, with sickening clarity, I felt my left foot slide backward. Not a step, a slide, but the kinetic vector was identical. My subdermal implant screamed, the red light pulsing with blinding, agonizing heat through my sleeve. The core was detonating. I looked down. I was sliding directly toward the jagged, glittering shards of the champagne glass we had shattered 3 minutes ago. "No," I shouted, bracing for the explosive heat of erasure. A shadow eclipsed the dim light. Mercer Dove. He didn't try to grab my arm or pull me forward. There wasn't enough time, and the physics were against us. Instead, he threw his entire body over mine, his heavy frame slamming me down into the floor and forcefully twisting my hips to the right. My left foot slammed into the solid wood of the doorframe, stopping its backward trajectory a millimeter before the temporal trigger engaged. But Mercer took the brunt of the slide. He landed hard on his back, directly in the center of the hazard zone. I heard the horrifying, wet sound of something sharp piercing through fine wool silk and flesh. Mercer let out a sharp, breathless grunt, his entire body going rigid beneath me. The blinding red light pulsing from our wrists flickered erratically, flared one last time, and then died completely, returning to the steady, cool blue of a stabilized temporal anchor. The loop had closed. The paradox was resolved. I lay there, draped awkwardly over the Red Faction's deadliest agent, breathing heavily. The sounds of the ballroom, the music, the laughter filtered through the heavy oak doors, completely oblivious to the violence that had just secured their timeline. I looked down at Mercer. His eyes were squeezed shut, his jaw locked in agony, but he was breathing. "Are you?" I started, my voice shaking in a way I entirely despised. Mercer opened his dark eyes, glaring up at me through a sheen of cold sweat. "If you ever," he rasped, his voice tight with pain, "step backward with your left foot again, I am going to let you explode." The temporal jump back to the 25th century was infinitely smoother than the accidental loop initiation, mostly because it was intentional. One moment, we were sprawled on the cold stone of a 19th century servants' corridor, surrounded by unconscious Pinkertons and a dead railroad tycoon. The next, the air pressure equalized with a sterile pop, and we materialized in the center of a neutral zone safe house in lower Manhattan. No chandeliers, no Strauss waltzes, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of ozone. I rolled off Mercer, my chest heaving, and immediately scrambled to my feet. Mercer did not scramble. He rose with the slow, deliberate caution of a man whose central nervous system was currently screaming at him. He didn't make a sound, but the rigid set of his jaw and the alarming amount of blood soaking through his ruined tuxedo jacket spoke volumes. "Sit," I ordered, pointing to a steel examination table in the corner of the room. For once, the Red Faction's deadliest agent didn't argue. He crossed the room, his gait stiff, and lowered himself onto the edge of the table, shrugging off his jacket with a sharp hiss of breath. I found the medical kit in the wall compartment. I snapped on a pair of latex gloves, grabbed a pair of surgical tweezers, and stepped behind him. The cut crystal had bypassed his ribs and lodged itself deeply into the muscle of his lower left latissimus dorsi. "This is going to hurt," I said, my voice maintaining its professional, analytical flatness. "I am a field agent Hayes," Mercer rasped, gripping the edge of the steel table. "I am intimately acquainted with the concept of pain. Just pull it." I clamped the tweezers around the exposed edge of the glass and pulled steadily. Mercer's knuckles turned white, but he didn't flinch. A sharp clink echoed in the quiet room as I dropped the bloody shard into a metal basin. I quickly grabbed a gauze pad and pressed it hard against the wound to stem the bleeding. We remained in that position for several minutes, my hands applying pressure to his back, his breathing slowly returning to a steady rhythm. The adrenaline of the mission was fading, leaving behind a heavy, profound silence. "I have to admit," I said, breaking the quiet as I reached for the medical tape, "I never calculated a scenario where a Red Faction operative would take physical damage to protect Blue Faction trash." Mercer let out a low, humorless exhale. "Don't flatter yourself, analyst. I didn't take a hit to protect you. I took a hit because your left foot is fundamentally stupid, and I wasn't about to let you detonate the timeline and erase me along with it." "Right. Pure self-preservation." I taped the bandage securely over his skin. "I'll be sure to note your heroic pragmatism in my report." "You do that," Mercer muttered, rolling his shoulder to test the bandage. He stood up, turning to face me. He looked terrible pale, blood-stained, and exhausted. I imagined I didn't look much better. We stared at each other for a long moment under the harsh fluorescent lights. Nobody said thank you. Nobody admitted that the trust we had established on that dance floor had fundamentally altered our operational parameters. We didn't need to. We were both liars by trade. We knew when the truth was better left unspoken. Scene break. 1 week later. I sat at my desk at Blue Faction headquarters, staring at the encrypted holographic display. My official debriefing had been a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction. I had detailed the mission's success, while heavily criticizing Mercer's involvement. I called his methods barbaric, his presence a tactical liability, and strongly recommended that Blue Command formally request he be kept off any future joint faction operations. I assumed Mercer had submitted something equally scathing to Red Command. The screen blinked, indicating an incoming priority message from the Blue Faction Directorate. I opened it, expecting a commendation for the successful elimination of Cornelius Vance. Instead, I received a disciplinary notice. The notice read as follows: Mission evaluation for Operation Gilded Cage. Status: target neutralized. Directorate note: Agent Hayes, while the target was successfully eliminated, forensic analysis of your returned garments has raised severe operational concerns. Point 1. Blood traces found on your left collar belong to Red Faction Agent Jackson Mercer. Point 2. The angle and trajectory of the glass insertion into Agent Mercer's back, cross-referenced with your spatial coordinates at the time of extraction, indicate that Agent Mercer physically shielded you from environmental hazards. Conclusion. This level of physical sacrifice contradicts all standard interfaction operational protocols. Your report omitted this detail. Explain this unacceptable fraternization immediately. Action: you are hereby suspended from active duty for 30 days pending an internal review. I stared at the glowing text. I blinked, read it again, and then, despite the fact that my career was currently in jeopardy, I started to laugh. It was the dry, helpless laughter of a man who realized that physics and forensic science had entirely ruined a perfectly good lie. Scene break. 3 days into my suspension, I found myself sitting outside a small, completely unremarkable sidewalk cafe in Brooklyn. It was a crisp, clear afternoon. I had a newspaper I wasn't reading, and a growing sense of boredom that only a workaholic analyst could fully appreciate. The bell above the cafe door chimed. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. The heavy, deliberate footfalls were unmistakable. Jackson Mercer walked out, wearing a dark wool coat that hid whatever bandages he was still wearing. He looked around the patio, his eyes locking onto me with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. He didn't look surprised. I suppose neither was I. He walked over and pulled out the chair opposite me without asking for permission. Internal review, I asked mildly, folding my newspaper. 30 days, Mercer said, his expression completely deadpan. Apparently, Red Command's forensic analysts realized my laceration was sustained, while unnecessarily prioritizing the structural integrity of a rival agent over tactical evasion. A tragic miscalculation on your part, I noted. A momentary lapse in judgment, he agreed, leaning back in his chair. A young waiter approached our table, looking harried. He placed a steaming ceramic mug in front of me and practically sprinted away. I frowned, looking down at the dark, bitter liquid. I ordered Earl Grey. This is an Americano. I stood up, pushing my chair back to signal the waiter. As I did, I lost my balance for a fraction of a second on the uneven cobblestone. To steady myself, my body reacted purely on instinct. I stepped backward, with my left foot. In a terrifying, instantaneous synchronized reaction, every muscle in my body locked. My breath hitched in my throat. My eyes widened in sheer panic, bracing for the sickening sensation of a temporal reset, the smell of ozone, the sudden blast of a Strauss waltz. Across the table, Jackson Mercer reacted with the exact same violent reflex. His hand slammed flat against the cafe table. His jaw clenched tight enough to crack bone, his shoulders completely rigid, as he braced for the kinetic shockwave of a fractured timeline. A second passed, then two. A pigeon cooed nearby. A taxi honked on the street. No ozone, no waltz. Just the cool Brooklyn breeze. Slowly, the realization washed over us. We weren't wearing the implants. We weren't in 1895. We were just two suspended agents sitting outside a coffee shop, traumatized by the basic mechanics of walking. I looked at my left foot, still planted firmly behind me. Then I looked up at Mercer. Mercer was staring at me, his chest rising and falling from the phantom adrenaline spike. He looked down at my foot, then back up to my face. The tension held for a long, fragile moment. And then slowly, the corner of Mercer's mouth twitched. The twitch deepened, softening the hard, lethal lines of his face, until it blossomed into a full, genuine smirk. I felt my own mouth curving upward in response. I sat back down, pulling the incorrect Americano toward me. I didn't care about the coffee anymore. I looked across the table at the man who had been sent to kill me, who had danced with me instead, and who was currently suspended for bleeding on my collar. So I said, picking up the mug, "What are you doing for the next 27 days?" Mercer's smirk widened into something that looked dangerously like a promise. "I don't know, analyst," he murmured, his dark eyes holding mine with the same intense, absolute certainty he had shown on the dance floor. "But I suspect you'll figure it out."